A great shot can go from cinematic to pretty awful with just one bad lighting decision. I know this because I've made every lighting mistake in the book, probably more times than I want to admit. And if you're just starting out, or if you've been at this for a while, there's a good chance you're still making some of these mistakes without even realizing it. That's why today we're going to break down some of the biggest amateur lighting mistakes and then how to fix them so your work feels professional and intentional. I'll also show you some examples from my own work to show that I too should have learned these a lot sooner than I did. If you're new here, my name is Curran Sheldon, and I am an ASC award-winning cinematographer and Oscar-nominated and 2-time Emmy-winning filmmaker. I started this channel to relay everything I've learned over the course of my 12-year career. Subscribe below to see more videos on doc filmmaking, cinematography, and everything in between. All right, before we go through this list of amateur mistakes, one note. Every rule in lighting and cinematography is just that, a rule. But that doesn't mean that rules aren't made to be broken. There are hundreds of examples of these mistakes being used by some of the best cinematographers in the world in some of the best movies ever made. But there is a big difference in making intentional choices to break a rule based on the story and scene and blindly making amateur mistakes. All right, with this disclaimer, let's get into it. All right, let's start with one of the most common amateur mistakes, flat broadside lighting. Broadside lighting is when you light your subject from the same side as your camera. When you first start out in filmmaking, or even in certain scenarios, placing a light directly behind the camera or on the same side of the camera makes logical sense. After all, you want to see what you are filming. But the problem is, broadside lighting means there's no depth, contrast, or life to the image. It flattens the image. The light is coming from the same direction as the camera is pointing, and so everything directly in front of the camera is generally washed out, lacking contrast or any dynamic shadows. I made this mistake forever in my early documentary interview work, and I continue to periodically make this mistake until I realized a basic formula to fix it. So how do you fix it? Start using reverse key lighting. Place your key light on the opposite side of your subject from your camera. This creates shadows on the side closest to the lens, adding depth, dimension, and drama. Even just moving your light a few feet to one side can make a world of difference. Some people call this backlighting, but I think that connotes something slightly different. Backlighting is often placing the light directly behind your subject, but reverse key is really just getting the light to the opposite side of the character as the camera. Once you realize this, you can find the main light in any situation and place your camera so that the light is falling across the subject's face rather than lighting it on the broadside. For interviews or fiction scenes where a character is talking to another character, just remember this formula: camera, interviewee or character, then key light. Here's an interview I did back when I didn't care about interview lighting at all. The general setup isn't too bad and would have been a really nice interview if I knew about reverse key lighting back then, but I didn't, and I never used this shot. Once you know the reverse key technique, you will never not see it in any movie. It's everywhere and the quickest way to go from amateur to slightly less amateur. All right, next up, blowing out your background. This happens when your subject is properly exposed, but the background is way too bright and completely overexposed. It's distracting and it looks amateur. It instantly pulls your viewer out of the story you're trying to tell and draws their attention to the brightest part of the frame, which is the overexposed areas. The fix? Balance your exposure. Use ND filters if you're outside, or close down your aperture to bring those highlights down. Remember, your background should support your subject, not compete with it. Now, this section has a part B, because there's an amateur mistake that also deals with this subject, and that's not blowing out your background, at least a little bit, when the scene calls for it. What I'm talking about here is when you are shooting inside a house and the windows behind your subject or within the frame somewhere are the same exposure as the light in the room. There are tons of videos on YouTube showing how to expose the windows the same as your subject, but it looks terrible because it's not natural at all. There's almost no scenario in the history of the natural world where the light within a room is brighter than a sunny day. Look at the work by Deakins on Prisoners or the entire show Succession. There are blown out windows everywhere, not because it's bad cinematography, but because it looks natural and correct to our eyes. So please, stop matching the exposure on your subject with the light outside. It looks unnatural and it actually creates the problem we were trying to avoid in the first place, a boring flat image. There is a saying in lighting: light spaces, not faces, meaning you light this space for the scene or interview and then bring your character or subject into that space. While I think many filmmakers would say that they often light the space for the face, and in documentary interviews especially, you're definitely focusing the lighting on the face. We should not completely ignore lighting the space around our subject as well. Often, a failure to light spaces results in very dark backgrounds that make it seem like your subject is in a void. Back when I didn't care about doc interviews and prided myself in being a documentary filmmaker that was all about capturing in-scene action, I would just throw up a light in any interview and get terrible looking images like this. And while I never intended to use the interviews I recorded, it would have saved a lot of headache if I would have spent more time to light this correctly, because it would have been nice to use these interviews in the final edit. So always make sure to light those spaces. When you are first starting out, it's exciting when you start bending lights to your will. You get to control the light, and with the LED RGB lights, you can create any color and any tone you want. So it's easy to get carried away and just start throwing lights everywhere. But the great cinematographers know that sometimes restraint is the best way forward. Deakins often talks about how he would love to use just one light or two in most of his scenes, and some of his best looking movies have no lights at all. The more lights you use, the more skill you need. And if you're just starting out or in amateur territory, it may be best to get really solid results with just a light or two. Which brings me to today's sponsor, Zhiyun. Now, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, then you know I am a big fan of Zhiyun lights, and I'm continually adding more of their lights into my arsenal, whether that's my travel documentary kit, my in-studio kit, or my main documentary interview kit. Now, I love Zhiyun lights so much because they are thinking outside the box when it comes to actually creating lights. For the longest time, lights kind of always looked the same and were shaped the same and weighed the same and pretty much had very similar details. But Zhiyun has sort of rethought different types of lights, whether it's taking off the ballast in their B500 and B300 series, making it a very portable but powerful light, or taking still powerful 60 watt and 100 watt lights and making them incredibly portable and almost pocket-sized. In my own work, some of my favorites of their lights are the X100 RGB series. Not only is this light incredibly portable, it also packs a lot of punch. And so when I'm doing a lot of travel documentary interviews, I often take the X100 with me because it slides right into my bag with no issues at all. But if I need a little more power, the G300 and G200 are also incredibly portable. They come with a ballast off of the main light, and so therefore you can put the light in a lot of different situations because the actual head is so light and portable. And then you can control the light entirely with the controls on the ballast. Often on my documentary interviews, I love using the G300 as my key light because it's powerful enough in most situations, and the X100 and X60 make incredible backlights or fill lights. So when you're just starting out, don't make the amateur mistake of just buying the wrong gear. Don't spend a ton of money on gear, which is another reason Zhiyun's a great choice because they're incredibly affordable for what they are, but also just get one or two great lights, a real nice softbox, and you'll be good to go. So for beginners, I'd highly recommend the X100 with Zhiyun softbox, or if you want a little more power, check out the G200 or G300. And although Zhiyun is sponsoring this video, it was I who reached out to them to see if they wanted to sponsor a series of videos because I have used their lights for so long and I really do love what they produce. Here is another amateur mistake that I made for far too long: ignoring practical lights. Practical lights like lamps, candles, or neon signs are more than just props. They're an opportunity to add depth, atmosphere, and realism to your scene. But too often, beginners either don't use them at all, or they leave them in the frame without paying attention to how they look. The fix? Use your practicals intentionally. If there's a lamp in your frame, make sure it's turned on and balanced with your other lights. And don't be afraid to tweak the bulb. Dimmers or dedicated cinema bulbs can help you control the intensity or color temperatures of the light. Practical lights are an amazing way to ground your scene in reality while also adding layers to your image. But just like any other light, don't overuse them and make the scene feel unrealistic. And finally, lighting without intention. This happens when you're just throwing lights around because you think you're supposed to, without asking yourself, why am I lighting this scene this way? What mood am I trying to create? What story am I trying to tell? Lighting isn't just about making things visible, it's about shaping emotion and guiding the audience's eye. The fix here is simple. Before you even touch a light, think about the purpose behind it. Are you trying to create a warm, inviting feel, a cold, tense atmosphere? Should your character be partially obscured in shadow or fully lit? When your lighting decisions are intentional, it shows. Every frame feels like it has weight and meaning. So there you go, 6 amateur lighting mistakes I know that I made for far too long, and hopefully you still aren't. But if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you subscribed or pushed that like button, and comment below about some of the lighting mistakes that you've made and how you fixed them in your own work. All right, we'll see you in the next video.